My name is Martha Maurer with KTAR News and KTAR.com. This is a special series to understand the current state of immigration enforcement in Arizona. I sat down with the director of the Field Office Division here in Phoenix of ICE to understand everything from the check-in process to deportation to raids and many more topics. In this second part, we take a closer look about ICE's role in raids or targeted enforcement actions. We also ask the director about what happens when an immigrant overstays their welcome, overstays their visas, and finally, what happens when an immigrant takes sanctuary inside a church, and what is the protocol by ICE. We've seen reports across the country, big cities like New York City and LA, of raids, of targeted enforcement actions. Are those happening in Phoenix, in the state of Arizona, by ICE?
Again, they're happening every day, targeted enforcement operations. I know the media and certain NGOs like to say ICE is doing raids and sweeps, and that's not accurate. They're always targeted. We're not going into a corner and just talking to people based on them loitering on the corner. We're looking for certain individuals who we already know are in the United States illegally, have likely been convicted of a crime, and we have deemed them to be a public safety threat.
So you're not walking into, say, a building, a church in middle of Mass, and figuring out, trying to see who is here illegally or not?
Absolutely not. Everything we do is targeted. Again, we're looking for certain specific individuals, and we're targeting them from arrest. Now, you bring up churches. Of course, we have a sensitive locations policy that deals with places of worship, schools, hospitals, even parades and protest events where ICE does not target people and those things without exigent circumstances or approval from Washington, D.C. So it's not to say that we can do that, but of course we can enforce the immigration law anywhere within the United States. But we try not to do that if we don't have to.
So what would be those exigent circumstances? What is it to stop you from going into a church where perhaps by media coverage, that somebody is living there, perhaps with their family, and has refused to check in, but is at their last level of appeals, can no longer go forward? What can stop you from going into a church and enforcing the law? Right,
so really going into a church, we have to, one, determine that it's a public safety threat. That if someone's fleeing, meaning maybe they're running from law enforcement and they ran into a church, and we think they might hurt someone in the church because they're armed and running with a weapon, right? That's a time where we're going to follow the person in and arrest them before they can hurt themselves or others. Now, if someone's taking sanctuary in a church and they claim to be living at the church for a certain amount of time, we'll evaluate the case to determine if we think that person is a public safety threat, whether we go into a location like that. I can tell you in Arizona, we have arrested people at a church because a church had called us. They had called us and said this person was running from ICE, and now they want to turn themselves in, and they're here at our church, and they want to turn themselves into you. And following our policy, we got approval through Washington, D.C. We went to the church location, we made the arrest. So it's a possibility, it's just highly unlikely.
But it's a process, and you go through several things for that event to finally happen.
Absolutely.
Do you believe that there could be an increase of immigrants who, knowing that, yes, it's a possibility that I could be detained within a church after taking sanctuary, but that they feel that because of what you just said, that there is a process, and because exigent circumstances must happen, or that you have that final word from D.C., that perhaps they feel that, I should try to do that, and more of those would take place to avoid deportation?
It's always a possibility. I can't pretend to get in the minds of everyone that may or may not do that considering this. I know that in the past people have claimed to be taking sanctuary into places of worship that ICE wasn't even looking for. And they kind of put themselves out there in the media, and we didn't even know they were there. So by announcing that, you're telling ICE where you're at. So people may not want to do that or make it publicly known if they're doing such things. But again, it is a process. It is something that we do not do often, but we have the authority to do so if we deem it necessary.
What about overstays? We know that it's estimated that about 40% of those people who are living in this country illegally came to the U.S. through a legal pathway, have either flown in or crossed the border by land, but have overstayed their welcome, essentially had some sort of visa that allowed them to stay and have stayed past their expired time. Are you actively looking for those overstays in the state of Arizona? Is that part of your enforcement operations?
It's part of immigration enforcement, although we don't currently have the best system to track those individuals, and that's the exit system, knowing when people left, if they came in as a visitor or to actually overstayed their visa. We do run across individuals often that have overstayed their visas when we do our jail operations, working in the jails. They may have been charged or convicted of a crime, and of course, if they come to our attention, then we will put them into removal proceedings.
Be sure to visit KTAR.com for more on the second part of our series, and also take a closer look at our first part, which dealt with check-ins and whether having a criminal record is necessary to be deported. And coming up on our final part of our series, we take a look at the human aspect. How do ICE officers deal with the separation of families while doing their job, and whether the Trump administration has made the job of ICE just a little bit more difficult.